People underestimate how much dumb stuff they have to do every day that can be automated. Especially now with AI changing a lot of things, I think the last thing you want to do is cross your arms and say, this is just a fad, this will blow over. Stuff is changing. You need to keep up. Like there's nobody else watching over you saying, I'll pull you along. Like I think it's your responsibility to try to keep up with this stuff. These tools are so powerful and that's become more apparent by the day.
Hi, this is John McBride, and you're listening to Open Source Ready, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the evolution of open source software and its impact on the tech landscape. Along with my co-host, Brian Douglas, we'll explore topics like open source AI, the business, and sustainability of open source. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or you would like to suggest a topic, find us on x.com/opensourceready. And we're back again with the Open Source Ready podcast. I'm here with Brian. How are you doing?
I am excellent. We got a lot of rain in the Bay Area, and it's getting colder again. So anybody enjoying your 70-degree weather, please don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's the 70-degree weather we have in Denver right now. I'm loving it. But we're here to talk with Thorsten Ball, coming to us from Sourcegraph from Germany, right, Thorsten? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing good. Yeah, thanks for being here. So I'm a huge fan of your writing and a bunch of the work and things that you've been doing. You wrote 2 books that I loved, writing compilers in Go and writing interpreters in Go. Why don't you give our audience just kind of a quick intro to who you are, things you're interested in, and then, yeah, we can dive into some very topical topics this week.
Sure. So yeah, you got my name. You know that I'm a programmer. I started out as a web engineer building web applications. Then I got more and more into systems programming, so much so that I ended up writing about it, self-publishing these 2 books. And then I got into the developer tooling world. I worked at Sourcegraph for nearly 5 years. First US company that I worked for, first really scaling startup that I worked for, changed a lot of things for me in a good way. Then the last year I spent at Zed, the new text editor, written in Rust. So I switched from mainly using Go to using Rust as much as you can in a year in one of the most hardcore code bases I worked in. Hardcore in a good way. And then now I'm back at Sourcegraph working on AI agents and developer tooling for, the world that's ahead of us.
Yeah. Microsoft has announced they're going to be rewriting their compiler in Go. I had to think about that because there's been a lot of back and forth on what they're actually doing. And I actually went and watched a video, the announcement, and read the article as well, because this was actually a pick on our last episode. So Thorsten, you know what they're doing. Would love for you to comment. You seen the no-go?
I don't know too much about TypeScript, I have to admit, even though I was there at the first JSConf in Berlin when they announced it. I was in the audience where people were sending on Slack, you know who that guy is on stage? He wrote C# and, and they were talking about Anders Halsberg. And so I was there, but I'm not a big TypeScript expert. But yeah, TypeScript is, a compiler that compiles TypeScript into JavaScript and does type checking. And it was bootstrapped into TypeScript. So TypeScript itself was written in TypeScript. And now they're rewriting this in Go. And I'm a huge Go fan. And I think it's a pretty, pragmatic language, which is also sometimes, I think, why it's looked down upon, as in it's boring and people say lacks some of the modern things that other languages have. But I can, talk about that. But so now they're rewriting this in Go. And I think the justification for it is pretty balanced, calm, wise, with a practical, pragmatic, whatever you want to call it. It seems that a lot of thought has gone into this, and I find it interesting. It's a good thing for Go. It's a good thing for TypeScript, I guess. And I'll stop here because I can talk for another 30 minutes just on this.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that was surprising to me was sort of Microsoft doing this. Because, the more meta ecosystem things have been what's interesting to me about this, not so much the they picked Go, why wasn't it Rust? Like some of those conversations don't end up being very interesting to me because, again, Go is practical. Go scales really, really well with a big team. But again, they being Microsoft has kind of a huge developer community around these things like .NET, and C Sharp, obviously. I think that's what kind of surprised me. Do you see this as kind of a, any meta play where Go was kind of a Google thing for a long time? Or is this almost kind of bowing down to some of their competition in the programming developer space?
No, for me, not at all. Like I read through the comments, and it took me a while to get why people were kind of shocked by this.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar that it's a controversial thing that Microsoft uses Google's programming language. To me, it's like it's open source, right? And it has been the case for, say, 10, 15 years that it's now boring. I don't know what it is at Google, but I'm sure somebody has used Teams there or something, or uses Office. The Microsoft world or the Windows world is not my world. I've been a Linux guy since I was a teenager, and Mac OS for the last 15 years. And when somebody was like, why didn't they rewrite it in C Sharp? My first reaction was, oh yeah, C Sharp, right. I forgot about it. Wasn't even on my radar. And that's not a dig at C Sharp, but it's just, I've been in the compiler interpreter space in the sense that, people tag me on Twitter. I read up on it. I try to keep up with it. I know different amateur implementations of different compilers, and C Sharp just wasn't on my radar. Like I think the next obvious choice would have been maybe Rust or
OCaml or something.
even OCaml or something else.
Yeah. I mentioned this book in the last episode where this came up as well, but I read a book called Building a C Compiler from Scratch, and it was really interesting because, and like definitely not as beginner as I was hoping it was going to be, but even just some of the beginning concepts are fascinating. You're talking about how important a good matcher is in the language that you're going to be using. And I think the author recommended OCaml. And that's kind of where I stopped. I was like, I'm going to go learn OCaml and try this out. And yeah, woof. Very, very challenging.
People always say this, that you need all of this and match statements to write a compiler or something. And I think there are moments when you write a parser or something like an AST or some tree, and you want to traverse it or you want to find out things about it, then it sure is nice if you have a match statement. And it sure is nice if, say, in Rust, you have, the compiler can check whether you have an exhaustive match statement and whatnot. But that being said, I've also, this was started in a pandemic and then it dragged on for 3 years. I wrote an optimizing compiler in Rust. And this was implementing a really small language, but it was, the books that I wrote, they show you how to write an interpreter in Go and how to build a bytecode compiler in Go and a virtual machine. And then this thing was me, again, trying to learn Rust for the third time in my life, not giving up. And this time I'm going to build an optimizing compiler. And that means taking the code, tokenize a lexer, parsing it into an AST, and then turning it into an IR, like an intermediate representation that's in SSA form. And then you do optimizations, which means you do graph traversals and graph sorting and all of that. And let me tell you one thing. What's not fun is traversing a graph in Rust and also trying to modify it at the same time.
Yeah.
And then you end up in this weird spot where you think, didn't everybody say that this is the perfect language for this? And then people say, well, you shouldn't do it like this. It's not really a graph. Use a flat array and indices into the array, and then you traverse this and blah, blah, blah. And so what I'm trying to say is kind of similar to what Anders said about why they're using Go, that it depends on what you're doing and it depends on what your code wants to do. It also depends on how experienced you are with the language, right? And I think somebody on Lobsters commented, kind of cutting through all of the noise, because I went through the comments just expecting people to lose it, oh, they're using Go for this. And so one person was saying, look, it's pretty simple. Apparently, 12 people or 10 people have already rewritten, I don't know, half or something of the TypeScript compiler in Go. And apparently they haven't had any Go experience before. And apparently it works. And apparently it was enough for them to make the call that, yes, this is a valuable project. Yes, we can make accurate estimates about the performance, right? That already tells you something about how good Go is, right? It might not tell you about, what data structures does it have and the standard library, this or that. But 10, 12 people not knowing the language can be productive in it, rewriting a compiler. And, being confident that they can pull this off with the given performance benchmarks. I don't know, that's a good argument, right? And that comment cut through a lot of the noise. And I think Anders was also saying that they want to translate the TypeScript code base from TypeScript to Go to get performance gains. What they're not interested in, I assume, is rethinking the whole architecture of the compiler, right? And he says the way the TypeScript compiler is written is pretty similar to how you would do it in Go, meaning there's like simple struct / objects, whatever. There's no crazy patterns that they would have to translate. And I think if somebody has translated a non-trivial program from, say, whatever, JavaScript to Rust, right? Then you realize, oh, you can do a normal translation, but that's not the Rusty way to do it, because the Rusty way would be traits or something. And then you have to rethink the ownership and how, stuff gets managed. And you could do this for very good reasons, and you get a lot of good payoffs, and it's, result is good. But is this what you want to do right now? Is this the time frame you have in mind? Is this the resources you have? Can you get the team up to speed on doing this? And I think what he's saying is just real world engineering. It's not, internet comment engineering where you compare feature lists. It's no, given a set of constraints, meaning the people that I have on my team, the time frame that's available to me, our goals, the history of this project, what is the choice that I make? What are the trade-offs that I make? And I think it sounds like a good trade-off and a good decision.
Yeah, you mentioned something in there that really resonates with me, just how quickly you can ramp up some people on Go. And, I've maintained some big Go libraries out in the wild and stuff. And just being able to get people, from 0 to hero in Go is pretty great. But it also reminded me of something you said kind of as we were chatting before we started recording, just around like kind of the current state of the industry and some of these kind of comments that, end up gaining a lot of traction and things, just around like, the expectation on learning and continuing to, I guess, improve or adopt as, the industry continues to change and adopt. What are kind of your big ideas around that and, how things seem to be changing?
Yeah. I feel like I signed this contract when I started as an engineer. And the contract says you'll need to always be learning. You cannot rest on what you know now. And you need to keep up with this. And to me, as somebody who switched careers from being a college dropout that studied philosophy into being an engineer, this was the reality. Like, I have to teach myself this stuff and I have to keep up with this stuff. Otherwise, I'm out of a job. And I think when I started, I implicitly assumed that everybody has this same thought. And back then, everybody was learning new things, or at least in my cohort, say people of my age or the people that I talked to at conferences and whatnot. And then I feel, now 10, 15 years later, you can see people just dropped out in some sense. Like, they stopped caring about learning new things, or they became the grumpy old man that they didn't think they were going to be. And as a concrete example, when I started out, I was in the Ruby community, and the Ruby community is super nice. I like the language. They're pretty pragmatic and super into product thinking. And I think a lot of people that I now work with or still meet, we're all doing different languages now, but we have a background in Ruby, and you can recognize that, yes, you were also part of that, and you also have this product thinking. But the people that I just mentioned, we all now use Go, Rust, whatever it is, TypeScript, something. But there's still people that I know who still use Ruby, which is also totally fine and totally valid. But they still have the same thought as 10, 15 years ago that Ruby is still the hot new thing. Or, there's no reason for me to learn something else. JavaScript on the server, that's not a good idea. Oh, AI, that's not, this is bad. And I'm just thinking, man, you're kind of starting to become like one of those Java developers that you made fun of back then. I feel like, especially now with AI changing a lot of things, I think the last thing you want to do is kind of cross your arms and say, this is just a fad, this will blow over. I mean, you have to be measured in how you handle it, and you don't necessarily have to go all in if you're in an industry that won't be touched by this, or if you, others job security something and or have other values that you bring to a business, then sure, like you don't have to keep up every day with what's being posted somewhere. But if you work in, for example, developer tooling, like I am or have been working for the last 5 years, is that this stuff is changing and you need to keep up. Like there's nobody else watching over you saying, I'll pull you along. Like I think it's your responsibility to try to keep up with this stuff.
Yeah. I also come from the Ruby community as well. Like that was the first language I learned, Ruby on Rails. Like first, 15-minute blog video that I watched. And when you brought up the C# thing, because I didn't know Anders was the creator of C# as well, also never crossed my mind of like, oh yeah, they should use C# until I started reaching like the X comments. I saw it come up a few times.
Yeah.
But there's other things like Zig, I think also is a thing that has got some hype around it. But when you talk about the practicality of Go and the practicality of the decision they made towards choosing this, to me it made a ton of sense because I know what Go can do, and I've crossed a chasm of oh yeah, Go. There's reasons why I would use Go, and I know where that comes in. I wouldn't call myself like a prolific Go programmer, but I can copy and paste pretty good from Stack Overflow. I guess what you used to do. I could use AI to generate Go. But yeah, I was going to ask a question of because like TypeScript, you mentioned not really as in depth in TypeScript ecosystem, but like there is a world now because I came from the front end space where TypeScript's kind of incepted everything. So all tooling, all front end frameworks are all like TypeScript first. Node is now, I think it might have already shipped, where the Node server already comes with TypeScript ready out of the box. Forget what version that was, but I guess the question I was going to ask is like, do you find it a problem that developers think in that sort of mindset of like, okay, this is JavaScript, so it's going to be TypeScript through and through, or rather, I guess like what I'm getting at is like I don't hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm going to drop down to Go or drop down to C and solve this problem." And do you think that's kind of the difference of folks who are going to be able to scale the future of this development tooling community? Or I guess I'll stop at that and let you comment because that's a lot to ask.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, the question is, can you ride the wave of TypeScript without ever looking to your left and right because it's still the most popular thing?
Yeah, especially in the world of AI agents where like the tooling is now being built in JavaScript. So it might be enough to be like, hey, stop writing this in Python, write this now in JavaScript.
So my opinion is that you should learn more programming languages than just one or two. And that doesn't mean you have to use them full time. That doesn't mean you have to get a job in them. But I think there's value in seeing the world through a different lens, which is what a different programming language gives you. Meaning, if you write Go, you look at, how to manage dependencies a different way, or the complexity, or tooling, right? And what I've been in my darkest moments when I've been ranting, I send a message to my friend on iMessage and I write, every front-end engineer should use a different language for a year and only then is allowed to come back. Because I think to make really good tooling, to write good software, you need to build up taste. And I think taste is important and you don't build it up by only looking at the same thing for a long period of time. There's some people who really manage to do it. And I'm not saying if you're a TypeScript superstar and have been for the last 10 years, that's a bad thing. It's not. But in general, accept that yes, you can be productive and ship stuff in Go. Yes, you can do this in Rust. Yes, you can do this in OCaml. Yes, you can do it in PHP. Yes, you can do it in JavaScript, in TypeScript, in C, C#, whatever. And it's really valuable to try and figure out what that looks like because those experiences help you then make other or better choices maybe in the language of, your daily language. For example, when I started using Go, 2011, 12, I think back then people made fun of Go because it didn't have a package manager. And people would say, oh, it doesn't have a package manager, so what happens? And a friend of mine, we were in like discussions and somebody would bring up that argument. He would say, turns out it's not an issue. And that was, of course, like a funny way of saying this, but it turns out in practice, it wasn't as much of a deal as it was made out to be. Like, yes, you had to vendor dependencies, you had to do this, but it had disadvantages, of course, but it also gave you this view of things where maybe it changes my approach to software if it's just slightly harder to pull in a 4-line dependency than just typing in a command, right? Maybe that changes my approach, and maybe that approach also has something valuable to offer, something that I can carry over into other languages. And I noticed this with a lot of people who've only been exposed to one ecosystem, that they don't understand how things can be done a different way, right? And the example I always use is my tax accountant. I think he's about to retire. I don't know, maybe not, maybe in 5 years, but he's mid-50s, I would say. He's been doing taxes for the last 30 years, right? And when I go to him and I rant about, oh, I'm selling ebooks online. That's a crime. Apparently, I have to fill out all of, whatever. That's really hard. And you can imagine what the tax situation looks like. And he goes, yes. And you know what? The rule book, when he started in the 70s, was this thick, right? But now it's this. And he said, the problem is now if you talk to other tax accountants or lawyers that are younger, that are, say, 25 years old, they think the law book has to be this thick. And if it's only half, then the world will go into chaos, right? You cannot imagine that without all of the stuff that I have, stuff still works. You cannot imagine the absence of something that you always took for granted. And I think with languages, you also have the same bias where you start to think, oh, it has to be done this way. And if it's done any other way, that's insane. Like, how would you even do this? How would you develop something in a language that doesn't have a standard lib? Or how would you do something in a language that has a huge standard lib but no dependency management, right? And I think it's valuable to dive into this.
Yeah, when I first was getting into Rust when I was at AWS, I'd been doing Go for so long that some of the cargo paradigms were like breaking my brain in a good way. And I was like, wow, like I love that I can just cargo clippy and like get like a formatter and all this stuff that is sort of independent from the tool chain and all this. But I want to shift gears a little bit to some of your ideas and thoughts in this space around AI, specifically in AI agents. So at Sourcegraph, you're working on new agentic stuff and developer tooling, and you've written about how AI agents are kind of going to be part of the future of this, or at least it's part of this new way of thinking as kind of the industry continues to always be transforming. Where do you see that going? Where do you see some of the AI agent tooling for devs going?
I don't know. I really don't know. I wish I would, but I think it's going to change. I think in a few years, we will look back and say, yeah, oh yeah, it did change. Like, I truly believe this. And that doesn't mean, oh, we'll all be out of a job, or we're only going to write software by talking into our microphone. I'm much more pragmatic than this, and I don't have the imagination. But if you now have models that can predict where your cursor should go in a file while you're editing, and it can do this really fast. If you now have models that at the push of a button can generate a 300-line perfectly working Go, Python, JavaScript, you name it, script. If I just did this before this recording, you now have models that I can say to somebody sent me an email that on my website, I haven't updated my employment information. Can you fix this? And my model goes and finds the file that mentions my employment information and updates it and creates a Git commit and pushes it, sends me a screenshot and says, does this look okay to you? Like, in this world, if we have these tools available to us, I don't think we're going to keep typing the way we have been typing for the last 10 years. In the same way that Ruby on Rails did something to development, Cloud did something to development, right? And it's not that no one will ever again tweak their Emacs or Vim config and, see this as a labor of love and write code for the love of the game. But I'm talking about bigger trends and efficiencies and what's valuable to a business. And if somebody comes to you today and says, oh yeah, for this little prototype website, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy a server, and then I'm going to go and drive to the data center, and I'm going to ask them where they can put it in the rack, and then I'm going to spend there a day and setting it up, and then I'm going to come back to you. You would say that's inefficient. That's a waste of, like, don't do this. Just go and use any of the websites, use any cloud provider to do this. And yes, there are still sysadmins. Yes, that does still exist, right? But you cannot tell me that, say, sysadmin as a job is the same as it was 20 years ago, right? And I think this is the type of change that I see coming, in that a lot of stuff that we've now done by hand will be, I think, automated or will get easier, be it, how to go from a blank page to a prototype, or from a half working prototype to something more solid, or from no tests to some tests. I see it as a pretty mechanical thing still, in that it writes code for you. It's not an oracle that can answer any question you might ever have. But if you know what to do, and if you know the right questions to ask, you can now use these tools and have them do stuff for you, in the same way that you might have used the Vim macro to change like the 50 lines matching blah, blah, blah in this document of 3,000 lines, whatever. And, again, as somebody working in developer tooling, this is changing my world, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to ask too as well, because we kind of got into this before we hit record, because you worked at Zed, you're working on Sourcegraph, who also has Cody. And like my intro to writing code was like Notepad and Perl scripts, like high school. But I didn't really get into it until Sublime Text was like, oh, everyone use Sublime Text.
Yeah.
And now we've got VS Code, which is like a behemoth in the space. So like I equate to like your editor being like your lightsaber, and like you add your config, and like it's your color, it's like your weight and how you want to like go battle. But there's like this new world where it's like no longer like you're now this might be a bad analogy, but like you're now the Jedi general, and you have all these Padawans, like your agents or your coding assistants. So I feel like, and I want to get your take on this, because you're right here on the sort of cutting edge of this and building it. Like, do you feel there's a world where we don't choose our editor, we choose like what Padawans we take in the battle when we're going to either write Go or write whatever? And the thing I was going to mention is I was writing Go a couple weekends ago, and it was writing like I would Go 1.5, I think, or whatever the latest one is I was using, and there was a change in 1.2 and standard lib, and the Copilot didn't address that, and I was getting like errors when I was trying to run my program and build it. So then I went in the system prompt, was like, hey, this is the version we're using, and then I went and like generated a system prompt from Effective Go, that series of articles, and then eventually now it's in the docs, and now I'm good. Like my Padawan is writing the right Go I need. It's like adjusting it in the situation that I have to build, and I have the confidence to like go do some Go routines, knowing that I'm going to have the latest and greatest Go. So like, what's your thought in like our evolution that now we have a series of agents or a series of Copilots and assistants?
Yeah. That's a really smart thing to do, by the way, like using the docs and...
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this is already advanced stuff. Like, you're already ahead of most of the people that, might listen to this, and I know people who've never tried Copilot, right? And I know people who tried ChatGPT once 2 years ago and brushed it off as, oh, it made syntax errors or something. And what I'm about to say is not going to resonate with them, right? The point I'm making here is that there's a huge divide of people who brush it off, and then I think people who, in my more caffeinated, when I have too much caffeine, I call it, when you've seen the light, like when you've climbed that mountain and you had this one moment where like, oh my God, it can do this. And then it does this, and then, oh my God. So all of that as a disclaimer. I said this just today. I said, I'm working on agentic tooling at Sourcegraph, and I'm working closely with our CEO, and we're both, or all of us, seeing the same things where you have these models and you think of them as like, oh, I ask a question, I come back with an answer. But then you give them tools, and then you put them in this agentic loop where you say, feel free to use these tools. I'll run the tools. I'll send you back the results. And I think if someone has never done this, what I'm about to say sounds nuts. But if you've done this and you've seen what these models do, it's mind-blowing. You give them, as a recent example, I gave Claude 3 tools. I said, you can read a file, just, basically Claude asked me to read a file, I'll give you the contents of the file. List directory, which is just an ls, and run a terminal command. 3 tools. And then I was talking to Claude in this loop, and I said, just trying it out. I was like, what does this file do? Blah, blah, blah. And then Claude was like, oh, this file does this. Oh, but there's a bug here. Let me fix this. And I was leaning back and I thought, it can't do anything. It doesn't have access to any file edit operation or something else, right? And then it got stuck and I thought, oh, is there like a loop or something? Or I messed the code up. And suddenly something came back and the file that it said it was going to change was marked as changed by Git. And then its response came back. And it turns out, given those 3 tools, what Claude decided to do, I didn't tell it to, what it decided to do to change the file was to run a terminal command that would echo the new version of the file that it wants and redirect that echo into the file. So it would run a terminal command that was this long just to modify this file.
And just pipe that through into the file.
Yeah, just redirect it into the file and use that as the editor. And I sat there and I was like, this is crazy. And I thought I could give this interview question to, say, junior engineers, and I bet some of them wouldn't make it through that interview question. There's like, give an only list your read file and run terminal command, and you cannot use an interactive editor like Vim or Nano. How would you do this, right? And it's just, oh, I modify, blah, 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 blah. So if you've seen this, and if you've had other moments like this, and you've seen how good this stuff can get at writing code when you give them a feedback loop, if, give them compiler errors or linter errors or diagnostics or something else, it's really hard to say, oh, there's nothing of value here. But instead, what I ended up thinking was, again, working on agentic tooling, exactly this at Sourcegraph, which is amazing. But I'm thinking, this is just the beginning. Like, if this stuff gets faster, if the tokens get cheaper, you can have multiple of those things running at the same time. And then you start thinking about, how do they communicate with each other? Or how do I communicate with each other? And then you start to think, what's the UI for this going to look like? What's UX for this going to look like? Because I sometimes sit here and I wait for it to finish stuff and I get distracted and I open Twitter or something else. So what's the solution to this so that people don't get distracted? And in everything I just described, what didn't I mention a lot? It's how you write code, right? You will keep writing code. You will correct these models. There is code that you will still have to write. They are not all seeing eyes. You have to direct them. You have to know the code. You have to be an architect, or at least know how to make good decisions. But these tools are so powerful, and that's become more apparent by the day. And again, like in a world where you have a small model, maybe running locally, that predicts your next cursor position, do you really care that your editor has a macro system built in anymore? If somebody has ever used, Z's inline completion or cursors tab or something else, you want to modify a CSV file to remove the third column. Like back in the day, meaning half a year ago, I would have been super proud to knock out a Vim macro and then, 20 add sign, Q, replay this for all 20 lines or something. But nowadays, you know that if you do it for 2 lines, the model gets it. And then it suggests you want to hit tab and I'll do it for the rest of those lines. That's a mechanical change. It's not an all-seeing oracle that's come down to earth to know everything, but it's on a mechanical level. This is changing editing, right? Like on a really dumb ergonomic mechanical level. And then again, like you have other agents deciding on their own how to manage these files and how to run tests and how to fix compiler errors and whatnot. Given all of that, looking at, me tweaking my Vim config years ago and people, writing quick scope plugins or like minimizing keystrokes, it seems all a bit like a black and white movie, right?
Yeah. There was a Twitter back and forth that eventually I also saw was on Reddit about whether or not candidates should be using AI assistants for take-home projects. And then folks are trying to figure out, like, how do you combat against that, or do you just like leverage that?
Oh man, there was also this whole thing going on where that guy from Columbia is getting kicked out of Columbia. He did like the Amazon interviews and a bunch of Fang interviews with his little like side leak code cheating tool, basically.
Oh yeah, he did on YouTube as well.
And it was on YouTube, and it's been a little bit sad to see him kind of speedrunning, the destruction of his early career. But at the same time, maybe he's proving a point around like just the ideals around like kind of how silly leak code and some of these interview processes are. I don't know, not to hijack your question, Brian, but
just one more. I would say that you still have to know how to code. You still have to understand how this works, because otherwise you cannot tell good from bad. You don't know what they are doing, right? And maybe at some point we get to this where you don't even have to check and they always nail it 100%, but we're not there yet. And I think, put it another way, I can only be efficient with these tools if I know how to direct them and really know, like, no, please don't do this. Use this library. Also, make sure that you don't fall into this trap of doing this. Do not special case this. Like, that's what I did like 2 hours ago. It put some special casing in it where it's like, if the key of this is exactly the value of this, then we do the special case. And I had to correct and go, do not special case this. Do not do it, even though it might work for this, but don't do it. And to me, it's something like the washing machine. It automates some manual thing to some extent, but should you think, oh, this is the magic thing into which I throw my clothes and they come out clean? No, you kind of have to know that you don't throw rocks in there or sand or something, right? And you don't mix the white and the colored red shirts or something. Like, you need to have some understanding what's going on. That doesn't mean that, you have to wash everything by hand, and it doesn't mean that everything has to go through the machine, but I think you need some kind of mental model what's going on.
Yeah. Your analogy of washing machines are good because I've got an 11-year-old who has no idea how to balance the load. So like if he drops his blanket on one side and a bunch of t-shirts on the other side, like that thing's gonna rattle all day. We're gonna think the house is coming down. And that's something that he will not know unless it happens or unless I tell him. So like we're still gonna ship bugs. Like AI is not gonna be perfect. But I think there's a world where we eventually get better and better. And we're building, like maybe we rewrite the TypeScript compiler in a weekend as opposed to 6 months.
I'll say one last thing on this. And that is, people underestimate how much dumb stuff they have to do every day that can be automated. I've been fighting this battle for years. I wrote a blog post called Typing Can Be the Bottleneck, where I told people, be good at typing. This is your job. This is how you communicate with the computer. This is how you input stuff into the computer. Don't pride yourself on being able to type 40 words per minute if you can type faster. And people tell me, oh, typing is not a bottleneck. And apparently they sit in the hammock all day long and think of ideas, and then there's just spurts of typing. But I'm sitting here and I have to look up docs. I have to use the search tool. I have to run terminal commands. I have to write Slack messages. I have to write Google Docs and RFCs and design docs and all of that. And being good at typing helps you with this. And I think when you look at development, once you have these tools and their assistants, you realize how much dumb stuff you have to do, like, oh, typing this git commit thing again, or doing, fixing when I move the HTML thing down here, then I have to update the imports up there, and then I have to do this and blah, blah, blah. And that's where I think this comes in. It's not the hammock moments where you dream of something amazing, but it's more this, there's a lot of brute force still needed and a lot of chores to do. And, the tooling can help you a lot.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of some of, and I talk about this guy all the time, but Cal Newport and some of his ideas around slow productivity and deep work, where I think he would argue that some of those things, the kind of monotony of like sitting with a problem for a really, really long time and then like coming to a conclusion or a solution is like part of the knowledge work.
Yeah.
Well, we'll move on to reads. Thorsten, I got to ask you, are you ready to read?
100%.
Read. Well, Brian, why don't you give us your read first this week?
Yeah, so there's a paper out there about the Sesame AI. So this is a conversational AI. I do remember it, like examples on a podcast I was listening to of folks doing conversations, like as a co-host on a podcast, like, hey, this is Miles. Miles, what do you think about this subject? And it's like built in like organic pausing. So it feels like the person's like actually thinking in that context better than like the GPT thing. So if you haven't read this, actually, I'm curious, have you guys heard the examples that came out of Sesame?
Yes, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And one of my favorite things to do right now is like I've got a 6-year-old daughter, and we were driving home from school, and she's like, hey, could you play that one song that the words go like this? And I'm like, listen, girl, I have no idea what the song is. Like, you got to give me more than that. So I'm like, oh, let me just pull up. So I ended up pulling up ChatGPT and doing this sort of voice talking function. And I was like, hey, can you play that song that goes like this? And it was like Sarah Bareilles' Brave was the song. which don't ask me to sing it because I can't even think of how it goes now. But then it started playing the song. It's like, oh yeah, if you want songs like this, why don't you listen to Katy Perry's Roar and like this and that? And my daughter was in the back seat just listening, and she's like, "Are they still on the phone?" I'm like, "Oh no, this is not a real person's computer." She didn't get the context.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty amazing experience because she's like, "Oh, can you ask her to do this thing or whatever?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, it sounds like she would like this stuff." And it was just, I can see where this world is going, and like it might be scary or it could just be amazing for kids and learning.
Yeah, I was recently also playing around with an open weights text-to-speech model called Kokoro, which is like, it shot up to the #1 on Hugging Face for this. But it also has that where it kind of has that weird, uncanny, like, even like just things that you'll hear, people making with their mouths off of mics or like in the phone, or like those pauses or like little grunts, little like noises and things. And that's just that uncanny valley of like, wow, I've never heard that before, especially from like an open weight model. It's a crazy future. Okay, I'll give a read here this week as well. This one's maybe a bit of a hot take. Not a hot take, but something spicy going on and out and about. But uBlock Origin, which is a very popular sort of ad blocker on the browser, has been removed from the Chrome store. And this is kind of a very, very long tail. I think probably the end of this, where Chrome had been saying they were going to do this. I think that uBlock was coming up with different ways to like get around it. And now it's just off the Chrome store completely. So the big behemoth Google continues to, throw some weight around for its ads business, is what it seems like. But I'm curious, Brian, Thorsten, do y'all use an ad block on your browser? What's your browser stack look like these days for this?
I've been using uBlock Origin for I don't know how long, long. So I was surprised when it didn't turn on or when it was deactivated and I saw the real face of the internet again.
Yeah.
Which I haven't seen in a long time. And it was also, I have like a work profile, right? And a private profile. And I think in the work profile, there's no history of whatever. So I assume, oh, I'm on a new website that I haven't clicked through all of the cookie banners and whatnot, but it was full of ads. And I was like, what's going on? Why is this deactivated? And I didn't know that. I don't know why they were deactivated. I thought it was something like outdated version. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't have any, I don't know, moral or ethical opinion here. I just know that I really, really, really do not like pop-ups. I do not like cookie banners. I do not like stuff that slides around on the screen, regardless of the content. It's just I don't like that form of UI. And so I've been using ad blockers ever since they came out in 2005, whatever it was, in pop-up blockers in Firefox or something.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Brian, because you've been using Perplexity more and more, which, is sort of a competitor to Google Search, where, Google Search is really just the engine for Google Ads and that whole business. I mean, where do you see AI search and ads and kind of that maybe concerning clashing of worlds happening in the future?
Yeah. And I was going to say, I haven't used an ad blocker since I was like a front end dev, like 2018. I had to basically use it so we could like figure out the workarounds. So I've been using the raw version of the internet, but I've also trained myself to not go to the blogs and the sites that have all the bad experiences. Like I paid for Apple News Plus because I'd rather go find the news somewhere where it's like, okay, just give me the news, and like I don't want to pay for 27 services to like read articles. But as far as like Perplexity, I've been using it for 2 months at this point, and I love it. I love the idea of having it embedded, like search AI embedded. I question on how above board it is and how they're getting all this content. There's definitely scraping a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But like when I'm trying to find out, so I watched the Warriors and like they're now on like a 9-game winning streak. If I were to find out, okay, from this game point on, like when Jimmy Butler joined the team, like what's the free throw percentage? And that's like stuff that you got to dig in real deep to go to NBA.com. And like, I'm not an analyst. I don't have the data. But Perplexity like crushes it on that. So when it comes to like ads, I think what they've done so far is I get pop-ups where I do turn off notifications on my phone because I just don't want to be pinged. But I know they have notifications and they'll just give you like, oh, here's a news article or here's something that's related, that's obviously an ad, but it looks like, some news article that's going to pop up in your face. That is how they're sort of, I guess, getting around that. But I turn off notifications, so it's not really working for me. I kind of just ignore that and try to get what I'm trying to get done there. So I think whoever owns the data, who owns that part, is going to be king in the future, and like trying to get people to click on ads and buy, I don't know, like earwax removers or whatever. That's currently a thing on TikTok right now. It's like they're trying to get me to clean my ears with some camera machine.
Oh my.
The world's going to change. I think the world's evolving in front of our faces on how people can like get your dollars out of your pocket.
Yeah. I think that's the one thought I had while you were saying this, that everything that we talked about in the last 30 minutes is just like the beginning of the internet, right? Where people were saying all kinds of stuff, right? Like, oh, because it's on the internet, then it'll be this, or everything will be on the internet, or the internet will solve this and this and that. And it took years, for that to shake out and to really, the boom and the bust of the .com era, right? To kind of realize that, just because a website is a website, it doesn't make it valuable. And I think all of that is being shaken out in front of us right now.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. That's probably the biggest thing I'm taking away from this conversation. Just, things are changing and, it's exciting. There's lots to be excited about as we're building and moving forward on things. But Thorsten, I wanted to ask you if you had a read this week or anything you wanted to share.
Yeah, my read is Simon Willison's blog post called "Here's How I Use LLMs to Help Me Write Code." He published this a couple days ago. For those who don't know Simon Willison, he's been blogging about LLMs, and I don't think he even calls it AI, now that I think about it. But he's a technical person. He wrote Dataset, I think. He's the creator of Dataset, the Python tool. He's big in the Python community. He's a programmer. He knocks out tools left and right. And for the past 2 years, he's been, talking about models, like the new models, how to run them locally, how to use them on a CLI, local models, Llama CPP, all of that stuff. And he's a special person in this world. He's calm, he's reflected, he's no hype, nothing. But he does have a good technical understanding of how these models work and what they can be useful for. So this blog post, I think it's something that a lot of people have been asking about. Maybe they didn't know that they were asking about it, but I think a lot of people should read this. And in this blog post, he talks about how to set the reasonable expectations. I'm reading through the headers here, right? Context is king. Ask them for options. Tell them exactly what to do. You have to test what it writes. Use tools that can run the code for you. And this is all practical can be advice of somebody who's used these tools and knows how to get something out of them. And all of that stuff is something that I would sign,
Right.
There's this misconception that people think on day one they know how to use these tools. And that's not true. It took me at least 1.5 years to have this moment where I realized, this is how I should approach this. And it took me, fine-tuning a model. It took me writing tests for models, using them with temperature 0 and using them in production to realize that, they can be programmed. It's not just a lottery ticket and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, try again and maybe put like an exclamation mark here or move this over here or something. No, I wouldn't say I can predict how good prompts are performing, but I will say that some people know how to prompt these models and other people don't know how.
Yeah.
And I think what he's describing is a lot of practical advice that helps you get more out of this. So I sent this on the Sourcegraph Slack. I'm going to put it in my newsletter.
Yeah.
It's a really good blog post.
Yeah, this was an amazing piece. And he's quickly become my go-to source at the Linux Foundation as well for, read this if you want to learn a little bit about prompting, or read this thing from Simon about, his evaluation of Grok or something. I had a very similar experience where it really took me building, AI agent stuff when we were at Open Source to really start to understand this is kind of how you can heat up and engage really the neural network that underlies the whole architecture of these things to get it to go down the path of that graph that you need it to, essentially, is really how I kind of started to think about, what these things really are.
The people made fun of prompt engineering and whatnot, but I urge anyone to build, say, a test that asks an LLM something about something. and then modify the prompt. And you want this in a loop, like you want it to be easy to retry. And then truly, like, say, I don't know, give a prompt to the model and say, here's a piece of Go code and it has a bug in it, or whatever. Maybe it doesn't have a bug, maybe something else. And then give it, say, 20 lines of code and ask it, how would you improve this, or what would you change, or something like this. And then play around with the prompt and start with that stuff that everybody laugh at. You are an expert programmer, or say you are John Carmack, or you are Russ Cox, or you are a security engineer, and you will then turn the temperature up and down, and you will see that stuff change, and you will see that if you stay with one prompt and the temperature is down and you rerun it, you still get some variation from depending on the model, but you start to get a sense of how this stuff behaves. And then you start to see that what you're really doing is like you're throwing these marbles into this big Rube Goldberg machine. And yes, it's a complicated big machine and all of these millions and billions of matrix multiplications. You might not be good at predicting where the marbles come out at the end, but you will get some intuition of how many marbles and where you're going to put them in. And then based on that, where they might come out. And it's not an exact science, right? But I urge anybody to try this and to get a feel for this.
Yeah, very, very well said. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So listeners, remember, stay ready.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.